Hello EU4 players, my name's Riemann, and today I'm going to talk about absolutism. The recent addition of this mechanic has profoundly impacted the rate at which you can expand. If you understand how to properly use it, it'll allow you to take double the amount of land you could in the Ages of Discovery and Reformation by as early as 1625. In this video, I'll explain advanced gameplay strategies for getting absolutism as quickly as possible, I'll show the best ways to use this sudden advantage, and finally, I'll go into the implications of how this mechanic affects the AI and the broader game as a whole. The start of the Age of Absolutism near the beginning of the 17th century heralds both the midpoint of a campaign and the start of a dramatic change in the rule set. Gone are the days of excommunication, crusades, and centers of reformation. In their place comes the eponymous mechanic absolutism, which ranges on a scale from 0 to 100. When you enter the age, you start at 0, and as you start accruing it through your actions, it provides the following bonuses which scale upwards to their full value at 100. The discipline bonus is nice, and nobody really cares about the core decay. The important one is the administrative efficiency, which reduces aggressive expansion, overextension, war score cost, and coring cost. A 40% discount on all of those is without a doubt the biggest bonus you can possibly get to your expansion potential. With how powerful absolutism is then, it's understandable that Paradox has made it slightly more difficult to increase than other values like legitimacy or prestige. There's a cap on the maximum amount of absolutism you can have that's affected by things shown here. The modifiers you should aim to have at the start of the age are here. It's also helpful if you have the 1000 development required to become an empire, although this might be difficult for newer players in certain starts. It'll add +5 to the max cap, and it'll make other parts of the strategy more simple, but it's definitely not required. As long as you have most of these conditions up here, you'll be fine. But having a high cap doesn't matter until you actually get the absolutism. Its value can be increased or decreased by the following actions. Here's where the interesting dance starts, because there's really no reason to pace yourself here. The bonuses of 100 absolutism are just sitting on the table waiting for you to grab them. In fact, absolutism is so important that it should be your #1 priority when the age rolls around. The obvious question then becomes, what's the best way to increase it quickly? Well, the most common method I see results from the natural position most players find themselves in. Usually you'll be expanding at a measured pace, which means by this point you'll have much of your land be well integrated with low autonomy. Then you'll have a bit that's been recently conquered with some separatism and higher autonomy. What I see a lot of players do is lower autonomy on the lands they can and use military points to do harsh treatment on rebels to get the majority of their absolutism. If you're going to do it this way, you should know that harsh treatment always gives you 1 absolutism no matter how many military points you spend. The cost of rebel suppression, on the other hand, is based on how many provinces the rebels are being generated from. It can range from 50 military points for rebels that come from 3 or fewer provinces, to a whopping 200 points from rebels that are widespread. Obviously, you should focus suppression on the cheaper rebels so you don't spend 4 times more military points than you need to. If you exclusively do it this way, harsh treatment will be just as good as strengthening the throne, giving you 1 absolutism for every 50 military points. The problem with doing it this way though is it's incredibly slow, it'll cost you a boatload of monarch points, and it'll exacerbate rebel issues in newly conquered territories. You really only want to do it this way if you have no alternatives. Another way I see people using is they'll annex a big vassal right before the age hits, and they'll focus on conquering trade company land. Since trade companies have an autonomy floor of 0 now, they're a fairly reliable way to decrease autonomy. Moreover, annexing a vassal will give you low unrest land that has enough autonomy to decrease it there as well. The upsides are that you won't have to spend monarch points and rebel issues will be mitigated, but the downsides are that you'll first need a vassal to annex, and you'll need to be somewhat precise about when you annex them. This method is much better than the first method, but we can still do better. The best method is one that actually uses rebels to your advantage. It's effective, quick, mostly painless, and all it costs you is a little bit of prestige. Here's how it works. First, you'll want a lot of provinces that have been cored and have an accepted or promoted culture. If it has a non-accepted culture, then the rebels will default to nationalists, which isn't something we want. Here's another reason why it's good to be an empire, because empires become cultural unions which accept all cultures in the same culture group automatically. Be sure to promote any other cultures in your nation that have a lot of development. This should make them have one of the rebel types we're interested in. Next, you'll need Unrest. You'll need it high enough to where it'll go positive for your home provinces. You can do this by overextension, firing advisors, temporarily switching away from a despotic monarchy, getting war exhaustion, and tanking stability, either through breaking royal marriages, switching your colonial policy several times, or declaring no CB wars, although you should note that you cannot decrease autonomy while at war. You don't need unrest to be super high, just high enough to where you'll see rebel demands pop up on the stability and expansion page. The 4 rebel types you'll be interested in are particularists, peasants, nobles, and heretics, because all of them increase autonomy when you give in to their demands. The best one is particularists, who should be common if your nation is large. They only cost 20 prestige to give into. Nobles are the next best, costing 20 prestige and 20 legitimacy. The others cost 50 prestige, so they can be worth it in large numbers, but if they're only present in 1 or 2 provinces, you can give those provinces to the burghers, which should flip them to particularists. Now you should accept their demands, and when you do this, it'll increase the autonomy in all your home provinces to where you can decrease it manually. Go to the macro builder, sort by autonomy, and slam it down everywhere to farm easy absolutism. The goal is to get to 50 absolutism in one go. This would require reducing autonomy on 1,000 development worth of provinces, which is once again the amount needed to form an empire. But if you can't manage this, you don't need to worry. If you lowered stability to get a high unrest, you can use this to your advantage. Negative stab reduces legitimacy, so you can simply strengthen government 1 month, wait for it to tick down just a little bit, strengthen government again, and repeat as needed. If you stockpile 1,000 military monarch points before going into the strat, you can increase absolutism by 20 points in as little as a year by doing this. Whatever your case is, do whatever's necessary to get to 50 absolutism, then it's time to pivot to the second half of this strategy. Now you could just leave it at that. You could take your 50 plus absolutism, not do the rest of the strategy, and it would be a sizable head start regardless of what your next moves were. However, if you want to make your advantage even more pronounced, your next goal should be to trigger the court and country disaster. When the disaster ends, you'll get a permanent reward of plus 20 max absolutism. The reason everyone did this in the past was to get the cap over 100 and keep collecting bonuses. While absolutism values over 100 no longer provide any additional rewards, it's still very much worth triggering the disaster in most instances. There are 4 main benefits listed here. In short, it'll allow you to get to 100 quicker, it'll give you some breathing room, it'll give you more flexibility with your government type, and it's an overall cheap way to slingshot yourself up by 25 to 30 absolutism points. If all this sounds enticing to you, then you'll want to go ahead and trigger it. The requirements to start it and for monthly progress are shown here, and it quickly becomes apparent that doing the previous part of this strategy leaves you in a uniquely advantageous position. You should already fulfill the requirements for the most part. All you'll have to do is declare war on anybody. You don't even have to fight them, so you can just dow a landlocked OPM in North America whose troops can't even reach you, and that'll be enough. Next, you'll need national unrest to be greater than 1.5. This is a value you can check on the stability and expansion page right here. Now usually, having positive unrest like this would cause problems, because rebellions would spawn everywhere, even in your well-integrated provinces. But by accepting rebel demands from the previous part, you get the minus 100 unrest in all those provinces. Thankfully, this doesn't negate the disaster spawning because it counts as a province modifier, allowing you to trigger something that needs national unrest without actually having to endure the effects of having your country hate you. With these 3 conditions fulfilled, the disaster will trigger in a little under 3 years. When it does, you might want to take note of the date because assuming something horrible doesn't happen, it will stop exactly 10 years after it started, and the game interface doesn't give you a great way of telling when that is. Next, you can go ahead and return your country to normal by raising stability, ending silly wars, and switching your government back to a despotic monarchy. The passive effects of the disaster are a moderate hit to the pocketbook and minus 20 max absolutism, which exists so you don't ride the disaster all the way to the cap. But if you have the normal things to increase your max absolutism, then you'll be able to raise it to 75. And if you have your golden age handy, you can go to 80. Overall, Court and Country is one of the most tame disasters there is. The only danger is the occasional rebel stack from event, and the rebels themselves are quite a bit weaker than the nationalists you're probably used to. You should have no problem making it through with ease, but I have a few tips so you can pass it with flying colors. The first is that a lot of the events are front-loaded. Here's a list of them. A lot of them can only happen a limited number of times, which means the early years of the disaster are a flurry of activity, but after that, things settle down. The second tip is that you'll get way more events than you need to get your absolutism cap of 75 or 80. This means you can occasionally take the option which reduces absolutism to avoid the rebels and still expect to hit the cap. I like to do this with Event 5, which spawns no less than 4 stacks of nobles if your nation is large. It would take a lot of mouse clicks to get rid of them, so it can be easier to just take the other option on the event so you don't have to deal with it. After the disaster has quieted down in 3 to 5 years, you can go ahead and resume expansion with small to medium-sized wars just to be safe. The psychological impact of being in a disaster is a lot bigger than its actual effect, so you definitely don't have to wait a full decade to continue blobbing. After 10 years, the disaster will abruptly end, and the bonus you get is determined by how much absolutism you have at that moment. It's broken down here, but there's really no reason you should get anything less than the full plus 20. After that, the question remains of how you should get to the max of 100. You could do it through military monarch points or with an age ability if you're lazy, but my preferred method is to do it in tandem with my golden age. This part of the game is one of the best times to use your golden age there is. The way it goes is that you would start it at the very end of the Age of Reformation, or if you're confident you can quickly fill out 3 objectives, you can do it early in the Age of Absolutism. Then the Golden Age would let you pick up 5 more absolutism during court and country, and after that you would be in the interesting position of suddenly having an advantage of 4% discipline and 10% morale compared to a few years previous. If you hadn't been quite powerful enough to declare war on a big rival, this would be the time to do so, and the additional administrative efficiency would let you do serious damage to them by taking lots of land, which you could then lower the autonomy on to fill out the remaining 20 absolutism. Lastly, there are a few things you should be aware of on how absolutism affects game balance. The first is that republics aren't very good once the Age of Absolutism kicks in. Not only do they have an innately lower absolutism cap, they also don't have legitimacy, which drops it further. They can still find a niche with their superior monarch point generation in the first 2 ages, and being a revolutionary republic is as viable as ever, but there's no reason to be a constitutional republic now outside of role-playing or going tall. Next, you won't want to decrease war exhaustion or increase autonomy in any of your provinces once absolutism hits. Keeping it high is important, so if you have rebel problems, your answer is a humanist idea group. Finally, vassal feeding isn't as good as it once was because vassals or client states you release start with no absolutism at all, so land that's less than 100% overextension for you can wreck vassals for decades by being over 200% overextension for them. However, the total amount of administrative efficiency has been raised to compensate, so if your aim is a world conquest, you'll be doing more of the coring yourself than you would have expected previously. Absolutism has had a huge impact on how expansion proceeds in the latter half of the game. With a proper understanding of it, it can swiftly catapult you to blob to an enormous size. Using the strategies I outlined in this video can let you accrue it very swiftly. In fact, you can get to 50 plus absolutism on the very first day it becomes available. This strategy is reliable, relatively simple, and mostly pain-free, potentially saving you thousands of military monarch points and letting you begin accelerated conquests much earlier than if you were using other methods. My name's Riemann, and until next time, thanks for watching.